So, where did we come from? It's a huge question, probably the biggest one we ask ourselves. And the simple answer is Africa. That's it. Humanity began in Africa, but that simple answer hides a much bigger, more complicated, and honestly more interesting story. It wasn't a single place. It wasn't a single moment, like a light switch turning on. Our origin wasn't an event. It was a process. A long, messy, sprawling process that took place across a vast continent over millions of years. To really get into it, we first have to ask another question. What do we mean by human? If you mean our species, Homo sapiens, the ones with the big brains, the flat faces, the ones who build cities and write emails, that's one story. But if you mean the first of our ancestors who stood up on two legs and started down a different path from the other apes, that's a much older story. The family tree of humanity isn't a straight line. It's not a neat progression from a stooped ape to an upright person. It's more like a thick, tangled bush with lots of branches. Many of those branches were dead ends. They were different kinds of early humans who lived, survived for a while, and then vanished. We are the only branch left. Let's go way back. Back before Homo sapiens. Back to the very first steps. The story for a long time was centered in one specific part of Africa, East Africa. Particularly in a place called the Great Rift Valley. This is a massive scar in the Earth's crust, stretching for thousands of miles. It's a place where the continent is literally tearing itself apart. This geological activity created a unique environment. It pushed up old layers of rock, exposing fossils that would have been buried forever otherwise. And it created a landscape of mountains, valleys, lakes, and grasslands that was constantly changing. This changing world was the perfect laboratory for evolution. In the 1970s, a discovery in Ethiopia, right in the Rift Valley, changed everything. A paleoanthropologist named Donald Johanson found the skeleton of a small female hominin. He named her Lucy. Lucy lived about 3.2 million years ago. She wasn't a Homo sapiens. She belonged to a species called Australopithecus afarensis. Her brain was small, not much bigger than a chimpanzee's. She had long arms, suggesting she was still comfortable in trees. But her pelvis and leg bones were a dead giveaway. She walked upright, on two legs. This was bipedalism, and it was a huge deal. Walking on two legs was a fundamental shift. It freed up the hands. Hands could now be used to carry food, to hold tools, to protect children. It was a massive evolutionary gamble. It made us slower than four-legged predators. But the advantages must have been worth it. Lucy and her kind weren't human in the way we think of it, but they were our ancestors. They were on our branch of the tree. They were the start of the hominin line, the group that includes us and all our extinct relatives after we split from the chimpanzee line. For decades, East Africa gave us hit after hit. The Leakey family, a dynasty of fossil hunters, made incredible finds in places like Olduvai Gorge in Tanzania. They found skulls and stone tools that showed our ancestors were getting smarter. They found Homo habilis, the handyman, who lived around 2 million years ago and was one of the first to be placed in our own genus, Homo. They had slightly larger brains and were definitely making simple tools. Then came Homo erectus. This was a game changer. Found in places like Kenya, the Turkana boy skeleton showed a hominin that was tall and built much like us. Homo erectus had a much bigger brain, made more sophisticated tools, and was probably the first of our ancestors to control fire. And, crucially, Homo erectus was the first to leave. Around 1.8 million years ago, groups of Homo erectus walked out of Africa. They spread across Asia and into Europe. This was humanity's first great expansion. But it's important to remember, these were not us. They were an earlier, tougher, pioneering version of human. So the story for a long time was pretty clear. Our earliest upright ancestors like Lucy evolved in East Africa. The first toolmakers, like Homo habilis, evolved there, and the first great explorers, Homo erectus, evolved there and then spread out. East Africa looked like the one and only cradle of humanity, but science never stands still. The story started to get more complicated. While East Africa was in the spotlight, researchers were making important, though less famous, discoveries in South Africa. In a network of limestone caves northwest of Johannesburg, a place now called the cradle of humankind, they were finding other fossils. These caves were different from the Rift Valley. Instead of being buried in layers of volcanic ash, fossils in South Africa often fell into deep caves, were covered by sediment, and preserved in a hard, concrete-like material called breccia. Getting them out is a nightmare. For years, South Africa produced more Australopithecus fossils, relatives of Lucy, confirming that our early ancestors were spread across the continent. But then came more recent, more startling finds. In a deep, almost inaccessible chamber of the Rising Star Cave system, scientists found thousands of bones. They belonged to a new species they named Homo naledi. This was a very strange hominin. It had some very primitive features, like a small brain and curved fingers for climbing, but it also had surprisingly modern-looking hands and feet. And it seemed they were deliberately placing their dead in this deep cave, a behavior we thought was unique to much later, bigger-brained humans. It showed that the evolutionary bush was even more tangled than we thought. Different combinations of primitive and advanced traits were being tried out all over the place. South Africa wasn't just a sideshow, it was another center of hominin evolution. So, the cradle of our ancient ancestors wasn't one small spot in East Africa. It was wider. It included the caves of the south as well as the valleys of the east. And hominins were all over the place, adapting to different environments. But what about us? What about Homo sapiens? Where did our specific story begin? For a long time, the thinking was the same as before. Species emerged in a single place, probably in East Africa, around 200,000 years ago. All humans alive today, the theory went, descended from this one founding population. It was a neat idea. It even had a name, Mitochondrial Eve, based on genetic studies that traced all living humans back to a single female ancestor in Africa around that time. The fossil evidence seemed to back it up. The oldest known Homo sapiens skulls, found in Omo Kibish, Ethiopia, were dated to about 195,000 years old. They looked just like us, so it seemed we had our answer. Our species was born in Ethiopia. But then, in 2017, that story was completely upended. Scientists were re-examining some fossils that had been found years earlier in a place called Jebel Irhoud in Morocco, all the way over in North Africa. They had long been considered an odd, primitive form of human. But using new dating techniques, the researchers got a stunning result. The Jebel Irhoud fossils were Homo sapiens, and they were 300,000 years old. That's 100,000 years older than the fossils in Ethiopia. This changed everything. It meant that Homo sapiens didn't just pop into existence in one small corner of East Africa. People who looked basically like us were living in North Africa 300,000 years ago. When you put that together with other fossils from across the continent, a skull from South Africa here, a jawbone from the Rift Valley there, a new picture started to form. This is the idea of a Pan-African origin. The idea is that our species didn't have a single birthplace. Instead, it emerged from a network of different early human populations scattered all across the vast African continent. Think of Africa not as a country, but as a huge stage for evolution. For thousands of years, there would be periods of intense greening, where the Sahara Desert would become a lush savanna full of rivers and lakes. During these green Sahara periods, different groups of early Homo sapiens could travel and mix with each other. They would exchange genes, tools, and ideas. Then the climate would shift again. The desert would return, and these populations would become isolated from each other for thousands of years. In isolation, they would develop their own unique features. Then, the rains would return, the desert would bloom again, and they would reconnect. Our species was forged in this cycle of isolation and connection. It wasn't born in a single cradle. It was born in a continental network. The modern features we see in ourselves, the globular skull, the chin, the small brow ridge, didn't all appear at once in one place. Maybe the chin evolved in a population in southern Africa. Maybe the shape of our brain case evolved in a group in North Africa. And through these periods of mixing, all these modern features came together. Homo sapiens was assembled, piece by piece, from the contributions of different groups all over Africa. This makes our origin story much bigger and much more collaborative. It wasn't one chosen group. It was the result of a continent-wide experiment in being human. This begs the question, why Africa? What was so special about this continent that it became the engine of human evolution, not just for our early ancestors, but for our own species too? The answer seems to be instability. Africa, especially during the last few million years of the ice ages, was a place of dramatic climate swings. The environment was unpredictable. Forests would shrink, grasslands would expand, lakes would appear, and then dry up. For any animal trying to survive, this was a huge challenge. Most animals adapt by becoming specialists. They get very, very good at living in one specific environment, eating one specific type of food. But in a world that's always changing, specialization can be a death sentence. Our ancestors took a different path. They became the ultimate generalists. Instead of adapting their bodies to one environment, they adapted their brains to figure out any environment. The constant environmental challenges were the driving force. To survive, you had to be clever. You had to be adaptable. You had to be able to make better tools to communicate with your group to plan for the future. Our big brains are a direct result of trying to survive in the wildly fluctuating world of Pleistocene Africa. The continent wasn't a gentle cradle. It was a relentless evolutionary boot camp that forged a creature that could live anywhere. And eventually we did. The final chapter of our origin story is about leaving home. After evolving in Africa for hundreds of thousands of years, Homo sapiens started to look outward. There were probably many attempts to leave Africa. Some small early waves of migration might have left and then died out. But the big, successful push came sometime around 60,000 to 70,000 years ago. A relatively small group of Homo sapiens, maybe only a few thousand people, walked out of Africa, likely across the southern end of the Red Sea when sea levels were lower. Every single non-African person on Earth today is a descendant of this small group of pioneers. That's an amazing thought. But when they left Africa, the world was not empty. Other kinds of humans were already out there. These were the descendants of that much earlier Homo erectus migration. In Europe and the Middle East, there were the Neanderthals. In Asia, there were the Denisovans. These were not primitive brutes. They were intelligent, capable humans who had survived outside of Africa for hundreds of thousands of years. And when our Homo sapiens ancestors met them, they didn't just fight them. They also interbred with them. We know this from our DNA. Most modern humans with ancestry outside of Africa have a small percentage of Neanderthal DNA in their genomes. People of Asian and Oceanic descent also have Denisovan DNA. This means our story of origins is even more complex. We are mostly the product of that African evolution, but we carry a few ghosts from these other, now extinct human populations. They are a part of our heritage, a souvenir from our ancestors' long journey across the globe. So how can we be so sure about all of this? The fossils tell a powerful story. Old bones are the most direct evidence we have, but in the last few decades, a completely new line of evidence has emerged that has confirmed the African origin beyond any reasonable doubt. And that evidence is in our genes. By studying the DNA of people from all over the world, geneticists can reconstruct our past. They do this by looking at genetic diversity. The basic principle is simple. As a population grows and spreads, it accumulates small random mutations in its DNA. The older a population is, and the longer it has been in one place, the more genetic diversity it will have. It's had more time to build up those mutations. When a small group leaves to start a new population somewhere else, they only take a small sample of that original genetic diversity with them. This is called the founder effect. When scientists looked at human genetic diversity across the globe, they found a clear and undeniable pattern. The highest levels of genetic diversity are found in Africa. African populations are more genetically diverse than all the other populations of the world combined. A San hunter-gatherer in southern Africa might be more genetically different from a Yoruba farmer in West Africa than a European is from a native Australian. This is exactly what you would expect if Africa was the homeland. It's the source. All the populations outside of Africa are the result of that founder effect, where a small group left, carrying only a fraction of the total human genetic diversity with them. The DNA trail leads right back to Africa. It's an independent confirmation of what the fossils have been telling us. So, where did humanity begin? It began with an ape-like creature learning to walk on two legs in the woodlands and savannas of eastern and southern Africa millions of years ago. It continued with a host of different hominin species, a bushy family tree of experiments in how to be human, all playing out on the African stage. The unpredictable climate of that continent acted as a crucible, forging a creature that was uniquely adaptable and intelligent, Homo sapiens. Our own species wasn't born in a single village. It was born out of a network of intermingling populations, spread across the entire continent, from Morocco in the north to the Cape in the south. We are the product of a continent, not a country. And then, in what is just a blink of an eye in evolutionary time, a small group of these African humans walked out into the rest of the world and over a few tens of thousands of years populated every corner of the planet. The story is still not finished. New fossils are found every year. New techniques for analyzing ancient DNA are revealing more secrets. The details will keep changing, the dates might get pushed back, new, strange relatives might be discovered in a forgotten cave. But the fundamental truth of the story seems secure. We are all Africans. Our species was born and raised there. It was our only home for the first 95% of our existence. Understanding that doesn't just tell us where we came from. It tells us that every single person on Earth, no matter Where they live or what they look like shares that same deep, ancient African heritage. It's the one true story that belongs to all of us.